观众朋友大家好，欢迎收看本期红周刊面对面，我是主持人李健。我们今天非常荣幸地邀请到了麦普斯资产管理公司的创始合伙人马克·麦普斯先生。麦普斯先生被亲切地称为新兴市场教父，他在富兰克林·邓普顿工作了30多年，推出和策划了一系列专注于亚洲、拉丁美洲、非洲的新兴市场和前沿市场的基金。他的职业生涯获得了很多的赞誉，还写了很多本书。他是新兴市场国际制度的制定者和推动者。首先，热烈欢迎 Mark， 谢谢你花时间接受我们的访问。我有很多的问题想和你聊，但是我想我们可以先聊聊你的职业生涯。你在富兰克林·邓普顿工作了很久，还创立了自己的公司，其实有很多的成就。但是我想在开始之前，请你聊一聊你的漂亮的故事和历史吧，因为有很多的人不知道你是谁。
Thank you very much for that nice introduction. As you know, I've been in emerging markets for many, many years. In 1987, I joined Sir John Templeton, at the Templeton Organization to start the very first listed emerging markets fund. In those days, we only had 6 markets in which to invest, mostly in Asia and also Mexico. Since that time, of course, it grew very rapidly, and eventually, besides the Hong Kong office, which was the very first office we opened, I opened 14 offices around the world, in Asia, in Africa, in Eastern Europe, and in Latin America. And the assets grew up to 60 billion US dollars. So it's been quite a big growth. Then, as you mentioned, 2019, I left Franklin Templeton to start a new organization, which was designed to have a fund that focused on ESG plus C. That is, environmental, social, governance, and cultural standards for companies to ensure that companies met those standards, and also to have a portfolio with a very concentrated portfolio. This was very important to us.
你在富林邓普顿工作的30多年的时间内，其实在你的任期内，公司的资产从1亿美元达到了超过400亿美元，这是一个很大的转变。你是怎么做到的？
Well, first of all, performance was very important. Funds were performing very well, and more clients, more and more investors wanted to put money into our funds. Of course, we not only had one fund, but we had a number of specialized funds, Asia funds, China funds, a Korea fund. We had a frontier markets fund, and many different funds, but all dedicated to emerging markets. So the assets grew very rapidly.
我们知道，1987年的时候，约翰·邓普顿爵士找到你，当时是邓普顿公司想要拓展新兴市场的业务。您当时做了什么，让这位有远见的股票投资人找到了你？
Well, I had been presenting to Sir John in his house in Nassau, Bahamas, because I was working for a brokerage firm at that time in Hong Kong, and he was very interested in the research we were doing. So he got to know me, and he knew that I had been working in Hong Kong for many years, and in Asia generally for many years. So he figured that I would be the right man to start the Emerging Markets Fund.
您当时一直在研究香港市场，可不可以给我们分享一下香港当时的情况如何？
At that time, of course, the Chinese market was closed, so Hong Kong was a wonderful way for us to get exposure to the Chinese market. And the Hong Kong market was thriving. It was very active. It was very liquid. So it was a wonderful way for us to invest indirectly in China.
当时香港市场的机会怎么样？很丰富吗？
At that time, the Hong Kong market was primarily oriented towards property companies and also banks. The banks were listed, as you know, and property companies were quite large. So these were the most important sectors. However, there were also a number of manufacturing companies that were exporting to the US and Europe and other parts of the world. And these companies had grown quite a lot. So those were the 3 main sectors at that time.
您2021年旅行最多的国家是去哪里？
I'm now based in Dubai. In fact, I'm speaking to you from Dubai. I've been unable to go to Asia, because most of the Asian countries, if not all of the Asian countries, are closed due to COVID. I have an apartment in Singapore, which I haven't been able to visit for over a year and a half. So I've made my home here in Dubai, and it's a very good place because it has good scheduling for both the Americas and Asia. The timing is very good here, and it's very comfortable, and I can travel freely out of here. And I've been visiting Egypt, I visited Oman, I visited Turkey, and a few other countries in this region. So that's been the extent of my travel this last year.
在2021年，这些国家中有没有什么让您印象深刻的故事？
Well, what impacted us most was the fact that these countries are doing quite well economically. I just came back from Oman, and they're doing very well. And Egypt, we have an investment in Egypt, so that's doing well. Turkey, the same thing. We've invested in Turkey. But our fund has done very, very well. In fact, this last year, our fund has been the best performing of over 2,000 emerging markets funds globally. And mainly, that's because of our investments in Taiwan, China, and India.
你一共去过了112个国家，看上去你是用铲子把整个新兴市场和前沿市场翻了一遍。
Yes, I've been visiting all of these markets over the years, and I continue as long as I'm able to travel in these countries without the COVID-19 crackdown. I would like to be able to visit all these countries, and I'm very eager to get back to Asia to visit Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, of course, China, Philippines, Taiwan, Korea. All these countries are very important to us.
旅行对您来说是非常重要的一件事。其实中国有句老话也是这样的意思，叫读万卷书不如行万里路。所以旅行对您来说意味着什么？
That's a very, very good saying, and it's very apropos, very important to remember that visiting is more important than just reading. Of course, reading is important, but the significance of traveling to countries is that you meet people face to face, and you can see how they are behaving, how they're living. And of course, when you are speaking to somebody, it's not only the words they're speaking, but also the body language. The body language is very important. And of course, it's important for investors to observe. If we are investing, for example, in a manufacturer, we want to observe the factory to see how the workers are doing and what is happening on the ground. So yes, very important to travel.
在金融市场，我们遵循一个这样的周期，就是从1980年开始，其实是以日本为主的。在1990年代 ，TMT 公司发展的非常迅速，互联网公司也应运而生。从2000年到2010年，我们看到中国和印度出现了快速的增长和繁荣。所以，您认为下一个趋势会是什么？
I think the next trend of financial markets will be an emphasis on companies that have very strong balance sheets. In other words, very little debt, that have a very high return on capital. The reason why I say that is that globally we'll see interest rates rising, maybe with the exception of China. China is moving in the opposite direction. But in other parts of the world, particularly the United States, interest rates will be going up. So companies that are in debt and that have a low return on capital will be in trouble. That's one trend. The other trend is to do with technology. Technology is now impacting all parts of the globe and in all industries, regardless of whether you're in mining, manufacturing, banking, retail, whatever. All these industries and sectors are being impacted by technology. So it's very important to be in companies that have acknowledged this fact and have adopted and embraced technology.
所以您现在是在新兴市场寻找这些拥有技术的公司吗？
Yes, definitely so. In fact, a large part of our portfolio is in technology companies. But I must emphasize that it's not just a matter of going into, let's say, software companies or internet companies or companies that are involved in semiconductors, but it's important to go into companies in, for example, retailing or in manufacturing that have adopted technology to make their business more efficient and more effective.
我看到您最近接受采访，你非常非常看好的一个市场是印度市场，可以和我们分享一下原因吗？
Yes, I'm very bullish on India because the Indian government is now embarking on big reforms. If you look in the past, you'll find that the Indian market was very much hampered by strict government controls. Now they've loosened these controls and they've embarked on a number of initiatives to adopt technology. For example, now every Indian is offered the opportunity to have an identity card, which records information about him or her and enables them to open a bank account. You must remember, most of the Indians did not have a bank account up to this time. So all these changes are having a big impact and a positive impact on India. In addition, India is starting from a very low base. India is probably where China was 10 years ago. So the growth prospects are very good.
所以印度的卓越机会会使得这些海外或者说全球的资金更多的流向印度，而不是更多的流向中国吗？
We've seen recently, because of the Chinese market downturn, some of the so-called index funds, for example, ETFs, have tended to retreat from the China market. But generally speaking, I believe that money will continue to flow into China because there's so many opportunities. In our case, we certainly have not abandoned China. We continue to look at opportunities in China and to invest in China. So this situation is quite temporary, I believe. You'll see money continue to flow into China.
中国和新兴市场的差异开始越来越大，也有越来越多的海外机构把中国和新兴市场策略进行分开投资。您对此怎么看？
Yes, I think some of the institutions and investors targeted China as a special case, and you're going to see more and more of that going forward. More because the Chinese market is so huge. You must remember, China now equals the U.S. in terms of size, if not even larger. And the market in China is growing at a fast pace, so it cannot be ignored. Investors will continue to have special efforts and special conditions and instruments to invest in China.
所以您对中国的策略和整个新兴市场策略是现在已经进行一些区分吗？
No, actually, we have been focused in emerging markets in small and medium-sized companies. And in China, that's still the case. That's also the case. We are focusing on small and medium-sized companies. And actually, the recent government moves in China to have a more level playing field and going after the large companies that have dominated certain sectors of the economy is a very good thing as far as we're concerned. We think this reform will be beneficial for the market as a whole, and particularly for the small and medium-sized companies.
当这些政策，例如说对互联网巨头的反垄断政策出现的时候，您第一时间是会感到担忧，还是觉得机会出现了？
Well, I feel these are very positive moves. I know that some investors get frightened and say, "Oh, this is very bad for the market," but I disagree. I think the moves, anti-monopoly moves by the government and other moves to create a more level and fairer playing field is very good for the long-term health of the market. So I believe these moves will be good and positive.
您有没有关注到腾讯这家公司？它现在在减持一些它持股的公司，比如说京东，比如说4亿印度的公司4亿，您怎么看待它的这个行为？这是一个风险吗？
Of course, yes. There have been these changes that have taken place in the U.S. and in China, which has resulted in the decline. Yeah, this is just an individual investor decision that does not really impact us. We're finding that, of course, there's some investors that are retreating from China or they're retreating from India, but these are individual decisions and could be quite temporary.
您担心中国房地产债务会出现风险吗？
Actually, we have not invested in the property market in China because we felt that many of these companies were too heavily leveraged and were engaged in activities which were not appropriate. For example, as you know, some of these property companies got involved in finance, they got involved in sports, in all kinds of things, which they should not have been involved in. And it's very good that the government is beginning to crack down on these activities so that companies stick to the industry in which they are most expert and not get involved in other areas.
过去10年，整个中国股市的表现其实并不是特别好的，并不太理想，而且还拖累了新兴市场指数跑输了全球的指数。所以您认为 A 股的整个指数的牛市什么时候会到来？
Well, as you know, the reason for this downturn in the Asian market is because of these big monopolistic companies like Tencent and Alibaba. These are the companies that drag down the index generally. This, again, I believe is temporary. These companies will eventually recover after they get their house in order and follow the government guidelines and rules. And so this, as I say, I think there'll be a recovery in the A-share market as a result.
中国的这个央行开始降息，这和美国的政策其实是相反的，就像您刚才提到的一样，这对 A 股市场是一个好消息吗？
Definitely, it's very good news for the Chinese economy generally. So it's interesting to note how China is moving in a different direction from the US. While the US is raising rates, China is lowering rates. And that's good news for China, I would say.
您是如何应对新兴市场的这种高波动性的？
Volatility is with us in every market, not only emerging markets. If you go around the world, you'll find that all markets are volatile. So you should not be frightened by volatility. In fact, volatility could be an advantage because it gives you an opportunity to buy low and sell high if the market is moving up and down with rapidity. So we're not worried about the volatility.
您在新兴市场的旅行和投资中，是否需要和交易所和监管机构打交道？
No, we've been very lucky in the sense that we've been able to follow all of the regulations in the many markets in which we've invested. We've invested in over 60 markets around the world and had no problems with the authorities. Of course, we must follow whatever the rules and regulations are. And of course, they differ from one country to another, but we found it quite easy to do.
我们还非常感兴趣的一个方向就是中国市场的机会，想听听您对中国市场机会是什么看法？
Well, as I mentioned, China is a huge market and cannot be ignored. So the opportunities are definitely there. Of course, you must remember, being such a big market, a big country with a huge population, there will be failures, there'll be opportunities, there'll be successes. There'll be an incredible variety of opportunities in many different industries. So it's like being in a garden full of different flowers. It depends on which one you want to pick. But there are many beautiful flowers in China.
Mark， 你在 A 股市场、香港股市场和台湾市场的这个配比，这个投资的比重其实是不同的。您更看好台湾和香港的市场，为什么是这样？
No, we're not favoring one or the other. We look at all markets. We look at A share, B share, H shares, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and we consider the opportunities in all of these. It just so happens we may find more opportunities in one particular market, and therefore our portfolio reflects the better opportunity. But otherwise, we don't differentiate between any market. We look for opportunities everywhere.
我看到您的基金持有台积电，而且台积电的持仓比例很高。您为什么看好台积电？觉得它2022年的业绩持续性怎么样？
Actually, we did not invest in TSMC. We've invested in the companies that work with TSMC, the so-called fabless companies that do the software that go into the semiconductors. As I mentioned, we are more interested in the medium and small size companies. And that's true in China as well as other countries. In Taiwan, we've gone into these smaller and medium sized companies. And the results have been very, very good.
可不可以给我一个例子？
Yeah, like a company like eMemory is one company in Taiwan that has done very well in the semiconductor area and doing the software for semiconductors. So that's one example.
你对中国的电商怎么看？中国电商的天花板是不是要到了？
We, of course, have been looking very carefully at the e-commerce companies, but have not found any that attract our attention at this stage, because many of them are not having a very good return on capital or are not very good profitability. But otherwise than that, we certainly are looking at the e-commerce companies, but have not found ones that really are attractive to us. It's a big industry, there's no question about that, and we must keep an eye on it.
你有关注印度的这家电商公司就是4亿吗？它现在的增速非常的高，而且它在新兴市场很多的国家都有布局。它的模式很像阿里巴巴加上腾讯，那就说明它的估值可以有很高的空间。对于这家公司，您有关注吗？如果关注，您的观点是什么
Yes, we've seen that, but we do not have it in our portfolio.
好，您没有放到股票池中的原因是什么？
Yeah, it doesn't meet our criteria for profitability, growth, and debt.
您认为4亿会对中国的电商公司形成竞争带来影响吗？
Yes, it's possible that they will compete with the Chinese companies, but that's true of any company around the world. There'll be many, many competitors, not only to the Chinese companies, but to American companies and European companies. But it remains to be seen whether it will be a big threat. No one really knows at this stage.
我知道2019年的时候你参观了深圳，当时对那里的这个发展和基础设施印象深刻。你当时去了解了什么？
I was not visiting companies for investment in Shenzhen at that time. I was actually going into some private equity investments in Shenzhen. So we didn't invest in any of those companies.
您觉得中国投资人的水平如何？
Of course, there's a wide range of investors in China. There's some that just gamble and speculate, and there are others that give it a lot of thought and do their research. So you have all kinds of investors in China. I would say, generally speaking, the Chinese investors are getting more and more information and are making better decisions about their investments. And they're beginning to learn that you have to take a long-range view. You cannot speculate for the short term. But of course, you will always have that in every market, not only in China, but in markets around the world. You will find speculators who take a very short-term view, and the good investors, of course, take a long-term view.
如果让您给中国的这一批投资者提一些建议，你最想和他们说什么？
My suggestion to the Chinese investors is as follows. Number one, do your research. Don't listen to the advice of other people. Do your own research and investigate your investments, number one. Number two, take a long-term view. Don't expect to invest in a company just for 1 week, 1 month, or even 1 year. Take a 5-year view. Number three, be patient. Don't expect to make money overnight, because chances are you will think of speculation and that will result in losses. So I would say that are the 3 principles that Chinese investors should take.
您在深圳和私募聊天找到你喜欢和信任的私募公司了吗？
Yes. I've invested in a company that does other investments in smaller enterprises, new enterprises. So yes, there are some good opportunities.
可以给我一个名字吗？
Sorry, I can't tell you the name. It's confidential.
好的，我们理解，非常感谢。最后2个问题，一个是您对投资充满热情，会一直做下去吗？
Of course, I will continue to invest. Of course, I invest my own money, and I will invest on behalf of the people. So I will continue to invest.
在巴顿·比格斯的著作《对冲基金风云录》里，我们看到了一些著名的投资者，他们被很长时间冷落，因为没有一种投资方法是长期有效的。但是您有很多年的投资经验了，您有50年甚至60多年的投资经验，你是怎么理解投资的？到底什么叫投资？
Well, it's true that you can't stick to just one idea or one methodology. You've got to be flexible. You've got to be willing to change according to the change in the environment and the economies around the world. But the most important thing that stays the same wherever you are is that you're dealing with people, and you've got to do your research about the people behind the companies in which you invest. That principle will be maintained wherever you are.
好的，谢谢麦普斯先生，今天非常高兴能邀请您到直播间来，听到您的思考，我很高兴，也相信我们的观众朋友们听到您的观点很有启发，再次谢谢您。
Thank you. Bye-bye.